"Please don't sell me," she cried, but the man gave her the last money he had in his pocket. Amina stood beside the wooden stall the same way she did every morning, but today everything felt heavier. Her arms, her feet, even her breath. The market around her was loud and full of color. Sellers called out their prices, children ran between baskets of fruit, and the smell of warm bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Usually these sounds and smells made her feel alive, but today they only made her feel small. She kept her eyes on the dusty ground, drawing lines with the tip of her sandal as she waited for her uncle to finish setting up the goods. The stall was simple, built from old wooden planks. On the table lay hand-carved bowls, small cloth bags, and woven bracelets. Amina helped make many of these items, though her uncle never said thank you. She didn't mind. She had always told herself that working for him was better than having nowhere to go, but lately he had changed. His voice grew sharper, and his worries spilled out of him like water from a bucket with holes. She knew they didn't have much money. She knew he struggled, but she didn't know how bad things had become. Not until today. She lifted her eyes carefully. Her uncle stood a few feet away, talking to a man she had never seen before. The stranger wore a long coat and held a leather bag. His expression was serious as he listened to her uncle speak. Amina couldn't hear everything, but the few words she did catch made her heart tighten. Work, payment. Take her for some time. She froze. Her uncle's voice was low but urgent, like he wanted the conversation to end quickly. Amina took a small step closer, pretending to straighten the cloth on the table, but really trying to hear better. She heard the man ask a question, and her uncle answered too fast, like someone trying to hide fear. Amina didn't understand everything, yet she understood enough. The stranger glanced at her briefly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made her stomach twist. Her fingers trembled as she touched the corner of a carved bowl. She looked up at her uncle, hoping he would give her a reassuring smile, something that told her she was misunderstanding the situation. But instead, he rubbed his forehead with worry and kept talking to the man. She saw the stranger shake his head as if negotiating. Her uncle leaned closer to him and whispered something. Amina's chest tightened. A deep sense of danger washed over her, even though she didn't know the full truth. She stepped closer and tugged lightly on her uncle's sleeve. He didn't turn at first, too busy explaining something to the stranger. She tugged again, this time harder. He finally glanced down at her with impatience. "What is it?" he muttered under his breath, trying not to interrupt his negotiation. Amina swallowed. Her lips parted, but her voice came out in a thin, shaky whisper. "Please, don't send me away." She didn't know exactly what she was asking, but her intuition screamed at her that something was wrong. Very wrong. Her uncle frowned, annoyed. "Not now," he said quietly. "Stay by the stall." But Amina didn't move. "Please," she repeated. "I don't want to go anywhere." Her small voice trembled like a leaf in the wind, but the noise of the market swallowed it. People walked by carrying baskets and pots, and nobody paid attention to the frightened girl standing between two grown men discussing her future. Her uncle turned his body slightly, shielding her from the stranger's view as if her presence complicated things. "Go stand over there," he instructed, pointing at the stall. Amina shook her head. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried hard to blink away. It wasn't like her to cry. She had learned to keep her feelings hidden. But today, her heart felt as if it were cracking open. "Please don't let him take me," she whispered again. Her uncle's expression softened for a single second, almost as if her words reached a forgotten part of him. But then he sighed heavily, looked back at the stranger, and said, "She'll be fine. She just worries too much." Amina felt her knees turn weak. She stepped backward, her foot hitting the leg of the stall. She didn't understand why her uncle wouldn't answer her clearly. Was he really planning to give her to someone she didn't know? Why? What had she done wrong? Her heart beat so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. She scanned the crowd, hoping for anyone, to notice her distress. But everyone was lost in their own world. A mother argued with a fruit seller over the price of oranges. A boy chased a runaway chicken. A man arranged fresh loaves of bread on a wooden tray. Life around her was busy and ordinary, while inside her chest a storm was building. Amina rubbed her hands together, trying to calm herself. She didn't want to believe her uncle would send her away. He had taken her in years ago after her parents passed away. She had always tried her best to help him, cooking, cleaning, weaving bracelets, carrying goods to the market. She thought they were family. Even if he was often short-tempered, she thought he cared, even if he didn't show it. She never imagined he would consider giving her to someone else. Her throat tightened as tears threatened to fall. She wiped her cheeks quickly. She didn't want him to think she was being dramatic. She had always tried to be strong, but the more she watched her uncle talk, the more certain she became that something serious was happening. The stranger opened his leather bag, pulling out a small booklet and a pen. Amina felt like the ground beneath her feet was slipping away. She had never felt so scared in her life. She wasn't afraid of the stranger himself. He didn't look mean, but she was terrified of the unknown. What kind of work would he make her do? Would she be far from home? Would she ever see her uncle again? Would she be alone? She hugged her arms around her small frame, trying to hold herself together. Just then, someone else stepped into the edge of her vision. Another man, but different from the stranger speaking to her uncle. This one appeared to be a traveler, carrying a canvas bag and wearing shoes covered in dust from a long walk. He looked around the marketplace with quiet curiosity, as though he didn't belong here but was trying to understand everything anyway. His gaze swept past Amina, then paused. He noticed the fear in her eyes. It made him slow down, his footsteps growing cautious. He didn't approach her right away, but something about the look on her face made him stay near, like he felt she needed help even before she said a word. This man's name was Daniel. He had come to the village only to buy supplies before continuing his journey home, but his attention shifted away from his list of goods. He watched Amina carefully, noticing how she stood close to the stall without touching anything now, how her shoulders shook slightly, how her eyes darted between her uncle and the stranger as if searching for a way to escape. Daniel's heart tightened. He didn't know her story, but he knew the look of fear. He had seen it before, during his volunteer trips in other regions. Children caught in situations they did not choose, carrying burdens too heavy for their young age. Amina noticed him watching. At first, she felt shy. She looked down quickly, thinking she shouldn't draw attention to herself. But something in his expression wasn't harsh or judgmental. He didn't look away like most adults did. He seemed concerned. Genuinely. When she lifted her eyes again, Daniel was still there, standing a respectful distance away but clearly paying attention. He gave her a small, gentle smile. Not a cheerful one, but the kind that says, "I see you, and I care." Amina didn't smile back. She wanted to, but her heart felt too heavy. Still, Daniel's presence made her feel a tiny bit braver, as if someone in the world finally noticed what she was going through. Her uncle and the stranger continued talking. The stranger pointed at the stall, then at Amina. Her uncle nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together nervously. Amina's breath caught. She took a step forward, wanting to interrupt, but fear held her back. She didn't know what to say anymore. She had already begged. She had already cried. What else could she do? Her uncle glanced at her one more time, and she saw something she hadn't seen before, a flicker of guilt. He looked away quickly, as though her eyes were too heavy for him to meet. That small moment told her everything she needed to know. He was thinking about sending her away. Her heart sank like a stone in deep water. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The sounds of the market grew muffled, as though she were underwater. Her fingers felt numb. Her breaths turned shallow. Daniel noticed instantly. He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to make sure she didn't fall. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Amina blinked, startled by the kindness in his voice. She shook her head slightly. She didn't trust her voice enough to answer. Daniel followed her gaze and looked toward her uncle and the stranger. The pieces connected in his mind. He didn't know the details, but he knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Amina's uncle saw Daniel nearby and stiffened, as if afraid an outsider might interfere. He quickly lowered his voice, speaking faster to the stranger. Amina clutched the edge of the wooden stall for support. She felt small, powerless, and lost. Her world was shifting in a direction she didn't understand. She didn't know how to stop it, or how to protect herself. The only thing she knew was this: she didn't want to be taken away. She whispered again, not to her uncle this time, but to herself. "Please, don't let this happen." The words were barely audible, but Daniel heard the emotion in them, even without the exact details. He felt something inside him stir, an instinct to help, to step in, to understand. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet moment was the beginning of a choice that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel stood quietly near the stall, pretending to look at the carved bowls, but his focus stayed on the small girl, whose eyes were filled with fear. He didn't know her name yet, but her expression held more emotion than any words could express. She looked like someone who desperately needed help but didn't know how to ask for it. He could see the way her hands shook slightly, and how she kept glancing at the man speaking with her uncle. Something wasn't right. He felt it strongly. Amina noticed Daniel still there, and something about his presence made her feel a little safer. She didn't know why, but she felt she could trust him more than anyone else around. He didn't look like the kind of person who ignored another's pain. She had seen many travelers pass through the marketplace, but none had ever looked at her the way he did, with concern, not judgment. Her uncle continued talking to the stranger, who seemed eager to reach some kind of agreement. The stranger opened his bag again, taking out a notebook and writing something inside it. Amina watched nervously, unable to understand what he was writing but certain it had something to do with her. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the sharp edge of worry pressing deeper inside her chest. The stranger glanced at her again, but something about that look made her take a small step closer to Daniel instead. She wasn't running away, just moving into a space that felt a little safer, a little warmer. Daniel saw it. He understood that small step was a silent plea, a quiet call for protection. "What is your name?" he asked gently, not wanting to frighten her. Amina hesitated for a moment. Her voice felt trapped in her throat, but finally she whispered, "Amina." Daniel smiled softly, his eyes kind. "That's a beautiful name." She lowered her gaze, shy but comforted by the gentle tone in his voice. "Are you here helping your family?" he asked. Amina nodded slowly. "My uncle's stall," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried so much more beneath them: worry, sadness, confusion. Daniel nodded.
"You help him every day?" Another nod. She didn't know how much she could explain to a stranger, but her heart wanted to trust him.
And trust wasn't something she gave easily. Daniel glanced at her uncle again. Something about the man's hurried gestures, his nervous glances around, his insistence on speaking privately, all made Daniel uneasy. It wasn't uncommon for families to let children help at market stalls, but the tension in the air felt heavier than that. He leaned down a little so he could speak softly to Amina. "Are you all right?" Amina bit her lip and looked down. She wanted to say she was fine, because that was what she always said when anyone asked. But today she didn't have the strength to pretend. Her voice came out faint and shaky. "I don't know." He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want to stand by if something was happening. He waited patiently, giving her space to speak only if she felt ready. Amina glanced back toward her uncle. His conversation seemed to be growing more animated. She watched the stranger point at her again. Her uncle nodded, his shoulders tense. She turned back to Daniel, her eyes filling with fear again. "Please," she whispered, struggling to find the right words. "I don't want to go anywhere." Those simple words felt like a door opening, revealing the truth she had been too scared to say out loud. Daniel felt his stomach sink. He didn't know the full story yet, but he understood enough to know she was afraid of being taken away. He crouched slightly so that he was at her eye level. "No one should take you anywhere you don't want to go," he said softly. Amina took a shaky breath. She wanted to believe him, but reality made trust difficult. "I heard my uncle," she whispered. "He said." Her voice broke. She looked down, twisting her fingers nervously. "He said someone might take me for work." Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, letting her speak at her own pace.
"I don't know the man," she continued. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here, even if things are hard."
"I don't want to leave." Her small voice trembled, but she kept talking. She was too afraid to stay silent anymore. Daniel felt a surge of empathy. He could see how much courage it took for her to say those words. "Thank you for telling me," he said gently. "I'm glad you shared that." Amina blinked, surprised. No adult had ever thanked her for speaking before. She didn't know how to feel about it, but her heart felt a small warmth she hadn't expected. Daniel looked toward her uncle again. The stranger was now counting coins and shaking his head, as if bargaining for a lower price. Her uncle replied quickly, waving his hands in frustration. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know their exact situation, but he sensed that money, lack of money, was at the center of whatever was happening. He turned back to Amina. "Is there someone else you stay with?" he asked carefully.
"Anyone apart from your uncle?"
Amina shook her head. "No, only him. Everyone else is gone." Her words were simple, but they carried years of loss behind them. "I'm sorry," Daniel said sincerely. She gave a tiny nod. She was used to loss. She didn't want pity. But Daniel's tone wasn't pitying. It was understanding. The stranger finally closed his notebook and spoke loudly enough for Daniel to hear. "I can take her today," he said firmly. "Just give me a moment to prepare everything." Amina's uncle looked uncomfortable, but not enough to stop the conversation. "Wait," he said, raising a hand. "Let me think." Amina felt panic rise inside her like a sudden wave. Her breathing grew faster. Her hands shook again. Daniel stood up straight, ready to step in if needed. He wasn't sure what he would do yet, but every part of him felt responsible for the frightened girl beside him. Amina took a step closer to him, almost without thinking. Daniel didn't touch her or move toward her, respecting her space, but he made sure she knew he was nearby. Her uncle finally noticed Daniel standing close to Amina. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. He walked toward them and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Daniel kept his tone calm and polite. "I'm just checking if the girl is all right." She seemed upset. Amina's uncle stiffened. "She's fine," he said quickly. "She just worries too much." Amina felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Her uncle's words made it sound like she was exaggerating, even though she wasn't. Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't back away either. "She told me she doesn't want to go anywhere," he said gently but clearly. Amina's uncle forced another smile. "Well, children say many things, but sometimes we have to make decisions for them." Daniel shook his head slowly. Decisions should never make a child this scared. Amina's uncle clenched his jaw. "This doesn't concern you. We're family. We'll handle it."
Daniel looked at Amina.
Her eyes silently begged him not to leave. He turned back to her uncle. "If she says she doesn't want to go, then forcing her isn't right." Her uncle's expression changed. A mix of embarrassment, frustration, and fear crossed his face. He lowered his voice. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I don't have enough money. I owe people. I need help." Daniel felt a wave of sympathy. He knew what financial struggle looked like. But sympathy didn't erase the wrongness of the situation. "There are shelters," Daniel said softly. "Places that help families, help children."
Her uncle shook his head quickly. "No."
"I can't go to them. I just need to solve this now." Amina listened quietly, her heart speeding up with every word. She didn't understand all the details, but she knew one thing clearly. Her uncle was thinking about giving her away because of money. The stranger approached, impatient. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't have all day."
Amina felt a sudden chill. She stepped back instinctively.
her small hands curling into fists at her sides.
Daniel moved slightly, positioning himself between Amina and the stranger without making it obvious. It was a subtle action, but it made Amina feel safer. Her uncle hesitated. His shoulders slumped.
I don't know. The stranger looked annoyed. If you want the payment, we need to finish the decision. Daniel's eyebrows furrowed.
Payment. The word felt heavy and wrong. Even though nothing harmful was being said, the idea of exchanging a child like that made his heart ache. He looked at Amina again. Her eyes were wide and pleading. In that moment, Daniel realized he could not walk away. Something inside him, the same part of him that had led him to volunteer in different communities, spoke loudly now. He breathed deeply, preparing himself for whatever he needed to do next. Amina, watching him carefully, felt a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't something she could explain. It wasn't something she even fully believed. But for the first time that day, she didn't feel completely alone. Daniel took a slow step forward, gently but firmly placing himself in the center of the situation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He simply stood there with calm determination. Someone who cared, someone who listened, someone who might make a difference. Amina's heart steadied slightly as she watched him. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this. The moment Daniel stepped forward, everything began to change. Daniel stood in the middle of the marketplace, feeling the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. The wind carried the scent of ripe fruit and fresh bread, but he hardly noticed it anymore. All his attention was focused on Amina, the frightened girl who stood slightly behind him, and the two men whose decisions would shape her future. Her uncle shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. The stranger looked impatient, tapping his bag as if he had far more important matters to attend to. Daniel could sense how quickly the situation could turn into something irreversible. He could hear the marketplace noise fading as his thoughts grew louder. He wished he had more money, wished he had a stronger plan, wished he had more authority, but the only tools he had were his compassion and a determination that didn't let him walk away from someone in need. Amina watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. She did not know this man well, but something about the way he stood there made her feel as if someone was finally standing beside her instead of leaving her alone. She didn't touch him or speak, but her heart silently said, "Please don't let this happen." Daniel looked back at her uncle, who avoided his gaze by staring at the ground. "I can see you're having a hard time," Daniel said gently. "But giving her away is not the answer." Her uncle exhaled deeply, as if Daniel's words pressed on a wound he had been trying to hide. "You don't understand my situation," he said, rubbing his forehead. "The debts are getting worse every day." "I understand struggling," Daniel replied calmly. "But she is a child. She shouldn't pay for the problems you face." Amina's uncle's shoulders slumped. He knew Daniel was right, but fear of his financial troubles clouded his mind. "I'm not trying to harm her," he insisted softly. "I just need help." The stranger, who had been silently watching the conversation, stepped forward. "Enough," he said firmly. "Do you want the money or not? I have other places to go." The impatient tone made Daniel feel uneasy. He didn't like the way the stranger spoke, as if Amina were simply an item in a business transaction. Even though no harmful words were used, the lack of warmth felt unsettling. Amina instinctively moved closer to Daniel, her small hand almost touching his side. She didn't cling or hide. She just needed to feel near someone who cared. Daniel gently stepped forward, creating a small but important distance between her and the stranger. "She doesn't want to go with you," he said politely but firmly. "And that should matter." The stranger lifted a brow, surprised at the interference. "I'm making a fair offer," he said. "I'm not forcing anything." Her uncle is agreeing. "But she is not agreeing," Daniel replied. "She's clearly afraid." The stranger shrugged. "Children fear many things." "That doesn't mean they know what's best." Daniel felt the words tightening in his chest. He kept his calm, but his voice held a stronger edge now. "Children may not make every decision," he said.
But fear like this is not something to ignore.
The uncle looked between the stranger and Daniel, torn between his desperation and the growing guilt settling in his heart. His face softened for a brief moment as he glanced at Amina. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. Instead, he lowered his gaze again. Daniel inhaled slowly. He knew he had to do something more than speak. He reached for his wallet, a simple cloth pouch he kept in his bag. He opened it slowly, feeling both hopeful and nervous. He already knew what he would see inside. Only a small amount of money remained. He was saving it for his journey back home, hoping it would cover his meals and a place to rest. But now, that future felt less important than the frightened girl standing beside him. He looked down at the little pile of coins and worn bills. It wasn't much. In fact, it looked embarrassingly small compared to the stranger's expectations, but it was all he had. Amina watched him, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand what he was planning, but she sensed it was something meaningful. Daniel stepped closer to her uncle and held out the money.
"This is everything I have left," he said quietly. "It's not much, but take it. Just don't let her go."
Her uncle stared at the money in Daniel's open palm.
His eyes widened with surprise, then confusion, then shame.
He had been expecting money from the stranger, money that might be enough to help him for a while. But the coins in Daniel's hand looked so little in comparison.
The stranger scoffed lightly. "That amount is nothing near what we discussed," he said.
"This is a waste of time." Daniel ignored him. He kept his focus on Amina's uncle. "It's all I have," he repeated softly. "If it helps even a little, then please accept it instead." Amina's uncle swallowed hard.